Get a songbook, turn to page 650. 650. There's a call come ringing over the restless waves. Send the light, send the light. There are souls to rescue, there are souls to save. Send the light, send the light, send the light. The blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light. Macedonian call today, send the light, send the light, and the golden offering at the cross we lay, send the light, send the light, send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine, shore to shore, send the light. Gospel light, let it shine forevermore. Let us not grow weary in the work of love. Send the light. Let us gather jewels for the crown above. Send the light. Send the light. Send the light. The blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore. 908 will be the song invitation.
Good evening. Any business, but if you do have something, we want to welcome you. Maybe we drive the house. On our prayer list, we need to see our overhead and broken board prayer list. So we went in 4 years and also one from the overhead. What's happening is the Marshall, I think he's done quite a bit of work in Iowa. And he was in ICU in the hospital at Mountain View. He's been battling COVID pneumonia about a month. And then he came in prayer. Carter Street Church of Christ in Paris is hosting Summer Youth Series Northeast Coast of July 12th. And the church band will lead Monday at 5:35. So Jim Patterson and Jim Smith will be for a cover the pulpit. Looking forward to hearing this. Also, we need to get some stuff to bulletin board area meetings. That's quite a few going on there. We post. Maybe that's all we have. Anyone else have anything to add? Now we have this. Heavenly Father, we are so thankful for this day. All the many blessings that we have had. Thank you for this opportunity we have to come together, listen to that word, learn more about you. So that we might bring us. For the Father, we ask you now to go with our study, be with us, as we leave you, bring us back to this point of time. We ask you to give us right to you, Christ's name we pray.
Thinking about what to preach on it just now, minutes ago, felt like. I'll speak up. I don't know if that'll make it on the video that way. I'll look for it in earnest. before class, but I was thinking about what to speak on for the devotional tonight, and for some reason, my brain, I talked about my brain working in cartoons, but also works in work. And so I did think of a commercial. Do you remember the Did You Midas Sizing commercial? And the question was always asked, did you Midas size them? And the response in this one, particularly, this one commercial was, I didn't think it mattered. Didn't think it mattered. And of course, the response to that was, halfway up the giveaway, didn't think it mattered. But the Midas touch was what we were told to trust, and we were thinking about, did it matter during the course of that commercial? Question being asked. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 7. We'll look at the last part of Matthew 7 very briefly. I know we've had some good lessons lately on the Sermon on the Mount, and we've had, Austin brought some, touched on some very good points on the Beatitudes and other parts of the sermon here. Let's look together at the end, Matthew chapter 7, begin in verse 12. I think about this question, does it matter? Do you think it matters? What do you think Jesus is saying about these things that evidently do matter? Matthew chapter 7, therefore all things whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. And we call that what? The golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Golden rule. How important that is. He said, this is the law and the prophets. And look at verse 13. Enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And many there be which go in thereat. Straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leads to life. And few there be that find it. Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. You shall know them by their fruits. Verse 16 says, do men gather grapes of thorns, or figs of thistles? Even so every good tree brings forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree brings forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that brings not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore by their fruit ye shall know them. He asks the question in verse 15. Does it matter? Verse 13, verse 14. Does it matter what gate you go through? Does it matter what way you go? How you get there? It does. Does it matter? Yes. Does it matter what you believe and what you listen to? Does it matter what people consider to be truth? Verse 15. There are false prophets, Jesus says. Yes, it matters. Does it matter what kind of fruit is born in this life? What kind of effect we have on one another? What kind of influence we have on our neighbors? Does it matter? Yes, it does. He says it matters in that the end is mentioned in verse 19. The tree that brings not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Now let's look at verses 21 to 23. Not every one that says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, and he that does the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name have done many wonderful works. And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. People don't think it does in this life. As long as they just say, Lord, Lord, they don't think it matters what they're actually doing. Is it in obedience to Jesus? Is it doing what he said to do? As long as they say, Lord, Lord, they think it doesn't matter whether they are or not. Verse 22, many will say to me that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? Well, we've done some good things, maybe. In your name, cast out devils, and in your name done many wonderful works. Verse 23, I will confess to them, I never knew you, depart from me, ye that work iniquity. I don't know about you, but I've heard repeatedly now, in the pulpit here, that word iniquity is lawlessness. You practice lawlessness. Verse 24 to the first 27, the end of the sermon. It says, whosoever hears these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him to a wise man, which built his house upon a rock, and the rain descended, the floods came, and the wind blew and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. Everyone that hears these sayings of mine and doeth them not, shall be likened to a foolish man which built his house upon the sand. The rain descended, the floods came, the wind blew, beat upon the house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. Does it matter what you do in response to Jesus' words? Yes, it matters. If you hear them and do them, you'll be blessed. Does it matter what you do in response to Jesus' words? If you hear them and don't do them, this is what Jesus says. You're like a foolish man that is built his house on the sand. There's a great deal of difference from what we get. Great deal of difference. Singing song. Great deal of difference. Now it's not. Does it matter? Yes, it matters. You think about Matthew chapter 17. A few chapters later, this record is found in the gospel. Matthew talks about the transfiguration. And you remember what happened there in the two verses where Peter opens his mouth presumptuously, you might think it that way, and it says there that he is saying, we should build 3 tabernacles. One for Moses, one for Elias, and one for thee. Next verse says, while he is, as he was saying this, there in verse 5, God spoke to them. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Does it matter if we listen to Jesus? It matters to God. It matters to our destiny. It matters whether we're going to be obedient or not. It matters, Hebrews 1, 1-3, that God spent all the time in the history of man. He spent a lot of effort, did a lot of things with the prophets in old times and the fathers, through the fathers in olden times. Hebrews 1, God spake unto us in time past under the fathers, by the prophets, and He has in His last days spoken to us by God's Son purged our sins. He has done what is necessary to purge our sins. With obedience to the gospel, Romans chapter 6, we can have our sins purged, cleansed, washed away. We can be His servants. Romans chapter 6, there, toward the end of that chapter, Paul says, the wages of sin is death. Gift of God, eternal life, through Jesus Christ. It matters whether we're going to continue to sin or whether we're going to lay hold of God's grace. It matters. And something that matters this evening is your decision, your willingness to keep on serving Jesus Christ. You know, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15 about the resurrection, we look forward to the reward that is to come. Verse 58, he says that our labor is not in vain in the Lord. It matters. The things we do matter. The prayers that we utter matter. The good deeds we do along the way matter. They're not meritorious. They're not going to render us deserving of any reward in heaven, but God will reward nonetheless. They matter. The things we do matter. If you have a need this evening, make your life right. The opportunity is yours. You need prayers, strength, encouragement. Why don't you come and let that be known?
There's a stranger at the door. Let him in. He has been there oft before. Let him in. Let him in where he is gone. Let him in the Holy One, Jesus Christ.
thank you for this time that you provided us to come here and worship you. Well, we thank you for this blessing that we often take for granted. We know you provide this for us so we can study your word, come to know you better. And let us all come to realize what a great blessing that is that you do provide for us. Thank you for all the good blessings you gave us, our food that we ate today, our shelter, our good clean water that we have to drink, all the things that you give us. We know it all comes from you. Be with the speaker of the hour tonight that he may get his message across. Be with those that were mentioned tonight in our hearing about the ones that have had COVID and sickness, and be with the preacher and Marshall. Help him to come through this awful disease. Help us to pray and think about that every time we sit down and have a meal or something to remember him and his family. And also, while we're remembering families, please remember the ones that have went through that horrible tragedy in Florida. As we know now, it's just a recovery effort. So be with those that know they've lost loved ones, because you know their heart's breaking. Help us to remember them in our prayers also. Forgive us of our many sins. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Got are not new in the sense that we haven't seen them before, but it's been a couple of weeks and I wanted to have a few for people to look at while we're going over them. We had gotten into lesson 1 and we actually nearly finished it, but I wanted to go back over these things. I think we could have a lot of great discussion on the things talked about in these questions. We did discuss, you remember question 1, about the amazing things of creation and why people can see, understand different things about creation as amazing or as striking to them. And we talked about science and the fact that it does not, genuine science doesn't contradict reality. It learns from reality. We learn about the world around us through our senses, and we deduce certain things. We understand, draw a lot of valid conclusions so that we can progress in life. And number 4 was just a Disney quote, but there's more to do than can ever be seen, more to do than ever be done. That's number 4. That's the lesson 1, creation. Number 5, what is life? What is diversity of life? And are there limitations? We did talk about that a little bit. And number 6, How do we reason from observable reality to the existence of God, the Creator? Got that question read. We probably talked about it a little bit, as well as number 7. But through number 7, I'd like to discuss anything more or anything that I touched on, jar anything in your minds. Number 7 was, aside from being merely impressed or even awed by the world around us, how can we tell there was or is a designer creator? Any ideas?
The science is everything. And Big Bang explosion,
Okay.
Big Bang.
We can talk, yeah, we can talk.
If you look at what Big Bangs do, they don't create things.
That's a good point.
You can see through the complexity of life and everything and the order of the universe that there has to be a design that was made by.
Okay. And that's a good point to make in general about science, is that you can rule out certain things. Yeah, and what you know cannot be the case being eliminated, sometimes that leaves you with the only viable explanation. And that actually logically is something as well that holds water.
What doesn't science also believe that you have to be able to reproduce something?
Yeah.
In other words,
That's true.
you blow something up. and
Real
create
science, yes.
something that would be,
Yeah.
They might have substance.
And until it can be verified and proven conclusively, it's viewed as only a hypothesis or a theory. And if it can be substantiated, if it can be reproduced, it can be moved on to a valid conclusion, maybe becoming a law, a premise of sorts. Good points. So number 7, we can see the world around us. We can investigate a lot of different things in the world around us. We can even see into outer space now, millions and millions of miles. They tell us, what's out there now. And I was reading something this week about how many suns with planets similar to ours they thought there were. And I was reading about how many of those planets they thought might have water or might have oxygen and might have life on them, and so on and so forth. And it's okay to, indulge in that kind of speculation to some degree. But we think about the astronomical numbers, and they blow our minds. I know they do mine anyway. And people start talking about the times 10 to the X, and I'm just like, what? I can understand it. I mean, I took calculus. I understand it on paper, but I don't really understand it as far as what 10.02 times 24 times 10 to the 23rd really means. I mean, I know something about it, and I know what it stands for, but I don't really comprehend what it is to count to that many billions. It's something amazing. So we can be awed, we can be impressed by the world around us, the distances, the size, the matter, the mass, the time, the overall hugeness of the universe. And we can observe a lot more now than we could before. You might think of things a little bit smaller and more finite, just what's happened here in the last few hundred years. We can observe in our own nervous system inside our bodies. We have nerves that operate by firing. And, did you ever watch the Schoolhouse Rock cartoon with the nervous system? It likened it to telegraph lines and the messages that go up and down the telephone line, and those impulses, the way that man has set up to work those things. We set up those things. We figured that out. We figured that out recently, I might add. We've been around 6,000 years, and we figured out finally what electricity is and how it works mostly. So that's where science and technology can get us. And we can be impressed, or we can be awed, we can advance ourselves to some degree with science. But it's been here all along, hasn't it? It's been here as long as we have, for sure. It's been here, and we can see it throughout. What is it? The animal kingdom and the chordata phylum. It's amazing what we have round about us that we can observe and be impressed by. Now we figured it out in 300 years. We can see something medically, we can see something anatomically, we can see something that actually has its what is undoubtedly our Creator. Yes, ma'am. And somebody had a great deal of vision to be able to build what has survived under the present. And having had that vision, if you want to call it that, found a way to get it done. So that's impressive about man. But what's impressive about it to me, with my viewpoint, is that God made us in such a way as we can do that kind of thing, and we can work toward a goal, and we can do it collectively, and we can do amazing things. We better be at least trying to evaluate honestly the world around us and see whether there was a designer and a creator. And Romans chapter 1 verse 20 again says what? Romans 1 verse 20 says that we ought to understand that there is a creator. It says that we ought to be able to can see eternal power and Godhead. We can understand these things because or by the things that are made. Romans 1 verse 20. And it says that those that don't reach these conclusions, those that don't understand these things, are without excuse. That's the outcome. We're here, and it's critical that we do understand it. It's critical that we look for God. We feel after Him, as one passage says. It's critical that we come to know His will in the Word of God, in the Bible. It's critical that we obey it. But the first step is understanding that God is. And so, number 7, how can we tell there was or is a designer, creator? Lots of different ways, right? Whether you're a carpenter, houses don't build themselves. You know that a timepiece, something that measures the seconds and the minutes and the hours of every day, that didn't build itself. They had designers, they had makers, and for these things to exist, they had to have been put together in a certain way to do a certain thing. That's what I observe about this body. It was put together in a certain way to do a certain thing. Yes, sir. Exactly. Yeah, we we observe what's there now, and my understanding is that it used to have fantastically pricey coatings on them, like gold and marble and that kind of stuff that's there on the pyramids too. Uh, just they were cosmetically, I guess, a lot more pleasing, but those things have been pillaged and scraped off, and people have made off with those things. But yeah, it is astonishing. Just I've never seen them in person. I've not been awed by the size of them, but I have been to Houston. I've seen the Astrodome. That's amazing to me. It's amazing to consider what people are capable of, but it's all in the fact that we are able to command our faculties toward a goal because God put it there. God put that faculty in us to be able to do such things. Yeah. Sculpting itself is artistic and amazing, and being able to bring about likenesses, recognizable likenesses of some figures of the past. Yeah, it's great to look at that, the Old Man in the Mountain, or just whatever, and understand there's been sculptures and there's imagination that's involved in bringing those things to pass, and a lot of labor. Mm-hmm. Mm. But you're right, it doesn't. Yeah, the critical thinking applied to good questions about the ideas of evolution on a massive scale, like what is used to talk about the creation of the human race, that it doesn't stand up. Real critical thinking, real sound reasoning just doesn't see it as anything possible. It's not feasible. And we've talked about science already, and we've talked about it being something that is in the process of the scientific method. You've got to have verifiable circumstances. You've got to have the particulars, and things have to be reproducible. And when you have all of that, then you can progress and ask another question or a different question. And you just make progress in a science field by doing that very thing. You don't get very far with talking about origins and creation, asking questions, because how far does human history go back? Written, oral. How far does human history go back? Not very far. In fact, this book talks about our origins. This book talks about some things that happened thousands of years ago. What is it the evolution saying? Millions, hundreds of millions, billions. Well, they can't stop talking about the increasing numbers of years because, according to the theory, it ought to have been here all along. the matter was. And they talk about it going back and all having occurred, this Big Bang, through a super dense, the most dense, I guess, state of matter possible, and it finally just, for some reason, exploded. Okay. That's the Big Bang. And then you've got, out of this massive explosion, which destroys and does not create, somehow you end up with galaxies and multiple myriads of, I mean that literally, myriads of solar systems and that many more planets. And those planets also end up with these perfectly formed satellites, moons. And then you've got other things like comets and asteroids in our system that, for some reason, are not causing drastic cataclysms on a huge scale. In any point that we can verify and observe, we can't even predict that there's going to be anything cataclysmic in the near future. So we've got to take into account that from the observable universe and what real science can tell us, that we can't go back very far, can we? We can look and see, okay, there's certain things that have stood the test of time. We've talked about the pyramids. There's some things that have been around a while. We've got Hammurabi's code that's been around a long time, but it sounds an awful lot like the law of Moses, some of the things that are said. You've got a lot of things that, historically speaking, they occur in Scripture, but they also occurred in what is verifiable secularly. And you've got the same places being talked about in the Bible as are still there today, right? So God inspires faith in the world around us, the things that we can observe, the things that we can still see, and the things that we can know about humanity and his duration, his time being here. Yeah, we've done some things. We've gotten better and better at using tools, but God is the one that gave us the tools, and we have a lot going for us as far as our bodies and our ability to grow and mature as individual organisms. But God is the one that designed us, and we I think need to acknowledge that. And I think it is something that we should all acknowledge in the process of growing to maturity in a mental state or in a spiritual state. So why do some choose not to accept or have faith in God as part of reality? Number 8, that's the question there. What does it mean to not accept God as real? We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Last time, I think I said the brakes are off, right? There is no morality. There is no right and wrong without God. There's no one to say what right and wrong ought to be. Me? Is it you? Is it some council? Why would it be some council? Is it right to have an oligarchy as opposed to an aristocracy? Or why is it right to have a monarchy instead of a Congress? That kind of thing. You just have no basis for authority across the board in humanity if God is not present. And I'm not just talking about governments, but morality in general. Y'all familiar with Saint Augustine? Put the saint in quotes, I guess there, but he was a theologian and was responsible for, I think, a lot of the teaching that brought Calvin to where he was, John Calvin to where he was. at least they had a lot of viewpoints that were in line. And what you look at in Calvinism as a religious system is the fact that accountability pretty much disappears in that religious system. I mean, accountability just, you're either saved or you're not saved. And it is not up to you whether you're saved or not saved. You are saved and you are irresistibly saved. You are undeniably saved, and nothing anyone can do is going to change that in Calvinism. Or not. And St. Augustine pretty much held a lot of the viewpoints, like I said, that brought that to pass in a systematized way with Calvin. But St. Augustine, I'll put that saying in quotes again, he really wanted to find a way to not be accountable and say it's not my fault, which goes all the way back to Adam in the garden, does it? We all want to think it's not our fault to some degree or another, but part of maturing as individuals is learning to accept responsibility. And that is something, again, that comes with living and growing according to the will of God, especially. So here in number 8, some choose not to accept God as part of reality because they want freedom from morality. Some choose not to accept God because they want to cite this or that and say, well, this fossil has been in the ground millions of years, and you're saying the earth is only 6,000 years old. A lot of people bend over backwards and they try to make compromise. A lot of people will try to say this or that about explaining that away, but it's easy enough for me to just say God created a full-grown world. And it's not impossible to think of all of the petroleum in the ground being biologically originated. It's not impossible for me to think about all the fossils that are present and the petrified wood and so forth, and all the time it takes to generate that with pressure and so forth, and minerals, all of the elements of that God put together, and things were already in progress from day one. Okay.
Just because a person chooses not to believe does not mean that they are exempt from the law.
That's right.
See the heart.
And some people, and a lot of folks are like, yeah. You've got a lot of folks that will be in that category and are in that category. And there's folks that think like Scarlett O'Hara. I don't want to think about that today. I'll think about that tomorrow. It's something we'll put off for a while too. You've got people that don't want to accept, because once they accept the truth, then they need to obey, right? They've got to start acting consistent with what they believe. So they will not acknowledge the truth. They won't confess the truth that they would believe such. Good point. So Romans 1:20 does God provide adequate evidence for in the things that are made for us to see Him with eternal power. If He claims to do it and does not, He is a liar. But guess what? He cannot lie. That's the God of the Bible, right? He cannot lie. But it does say that they're without excuse, doesn't it? It does in my Bible. And these things that we can see in our scriptures should guide us, should enlighten us, as well as the things that are around us, as far as feeling out and knowing God, understanding His will, particularly right here in the Scriptures. I wrote in a couple more points here on my sheet. Number 10, no other explanation for life. We talked a little bit about biogenesis and the way that people used to think that you could get life from non-life, but they believed it in kind of a superstitious type way, didn't they? And then, number 11, there's no other explanation for observably consistent reproduction in life, in living things. Where did the concept of DNA come from? Doesn't even begin to make even good nonsense to have some primordial soup that somehow molecularly arranges itself so that it will consistently start reproducing itself. That's not reproducible in a laboratory. You don't get life from non-life. And you can't do it. God breathed into man, into his nostrils, the breath of life. It became a living soul. God created the animals, the beasts, the fish, the birds of the air. God created these things, Genesis 1 through 3, that tells us that things will recreate after their own kind, doesn't it? And that's what we observe in reality. I have lesson 2. I like the microphone.
You have time to discuss something.
Oh, yeah. We got time. Go ahead. Uh-huh.
I want you to discuss Mark 7, 25 through 29.
Mark 7, 25 through 29. And it's relevant. Let's see here, Mark 7. Get my Bible open again. Mark 7, what? 25 through 29. A certain woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit, heard of him, and came and fell at his feet. The woman was Greek, Syrophoenician by nation. She besought him that he would cast forth the devil out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, let the children first be filled, and it is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs. And she said, yes, Lord, yet the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. And he said, verse 29, for this saying, go thy way, the devil is gone out of thy daughter. Verse 30, she found the devil was gone out, and her daughter laid upon the bed.
It took me several days to think on it.
Okay. Well, you know where he is in this part of the ministry. He is in the borders of Tyre and Sidon. And that is up along the coast, above Caesarea, Mount Carmel, that area. It's above that. It's actually outside of what we call Palestine proper, but it is real close by. Along the coast, toward Asia Minor. And this is why it mentions that the woman, verse 26, is Syrophoenician. And he does, it's mentioned again in verse 31, he departs from the coasts of Tyre and Sidon.
Interpret what he means in verse 27.
Okay, verse 27 where he says, let the children first be filled. It is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs. He's talking about himself taking this action. Okay, this action of doing what she is requesting, cast the demon out. That's what she's requesting. That's what he's talking about. Is taking the children's bread. He is likening it to taking the children's bread and casting it to the dogs in this case. He says that, but that's just a viewpoint here. If you take that in consideration.
That's why I say this is tough.
And
I ask
Okay, in verse 28, my view on this is that she comes back with something, and it is legitimate. And it's not saying that Jesus has made a mistake. It's not saying that he was wrong in the first case. It's just he uses these circumstances and says what he says in order to bring, I think, a better understanding of all things, something that would help the apostles later on, maybe, in taking the gospel to the Gentiles, maybe. We think about verse 28, the dogs under the table eat of the children's crumbs. So then he says, okay, for this saying, go thy way. The devil is gone out of thy daughter. And this miracle, no less than any other miracle, it just happens amazing right away. It's straight away, as Mark would put.
Is this single Acts chapter?
I think it is in the sense that it's getting people to understand and know the power of God is behind the gospel going forth to all the world. That He is no respecter of persons.
I got somebody in the opinion.
Mm-hmm.
They're taking it a little different.
Okay.
I have a tendency. I got now.
Hey, I might be looking at it wrong, but that's just what I would say about it. Yes, yes. And He does meat, not fitting. Yeah.
Now, I know he's not. God never but he's here. The woman makes her
And if you read through the book of Acts and notice how many times Paul goes to the synagogue first. I mean, he may go to a Gentile city like Philippi, but he's going to find the Jews first. And at Thessalonica, he's going to find the Jews first. And this is what he does. It was his manner, is what Luke says. And then in the book of Romans, he goes into talking about early on, Romans chapter 1, the Gentiles are in sin. Romans chapter 2, the Jews are in sin. Romans chapter 3, we're all in sin. Romans 3:23, all the sin comes short of the glory of God, right? And then he is no respecter of persons. But he goes on in the book of Romans, and he's talking about what advantage then hath the Jew. Well, he does have a lot of advantage as far as knowing the mind of God from generations ago. And through the writings of the Old Testament, the Jew has a great advantage in knowing the seriousness of all of what's at stake, as opposed to this nation, that nation, this nation, that nation that's been in polytheism for hundreds of years. Okay. 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 Well, you look at just the facts that are given and understand what's being done. Jesus did a lot of things for what wasn't always obvious at the time. Right. No, I appreciate the question. It's a good question. And I'm glad to help if I indeed did. Anyway, I've got lesson 2. I'm going to run and get that real quick off my desk. I've got several copies, and I'll give that to Scott. Talking about it. I may actually be narrating the dog here. So lesson 2. Where's my lesson 2? There it is. should have brought that with me. Yeah. I apologize. Should have had this with me. Thank you, brothers. All right. Oh no, I'm not going to do that. But I do want it to be in your hands, and we can start talking about it next week. Yeah, there you go. Homework to keep up with it anyway. But I do want to take the time while he's passing that out to reinforce in our minds how it does come down to each and every one of us to try to help people, because it's becoming more and more prevalent in society that we have atheists, that we have people who have adopted Eastern religions that their families have believed in maybe for, or they're still practicing Eastern religions their families have practiced for many, many years. But we need to be able to help people to see the God of the Bible. And He is findable, He says, by virtue of evaluating what is round about us initially. And He continues to inspire faith in individuals and help them to grow toward Him and to gain a good relationship with Him by many different things. And we'll look at those things in the Word, and that is what the next lesson is, the Word. God inspires faith with the Word. Appreciate all the discussion. It's helpful.